I have this theory that these days we've forgotten how to end stories. My most damning evidence is, of course, George R. R. Martin and his A Song of Ice and Fire series. He's waited so long to publish the final book, or write the final book, and he's let so much anticipation build that I'm pretty sure he would rather fake his own death than ever have to publish that final book and face the inevitable backlash. But it's not just him. All of our media, from books to TV to movies, seem terrified to actually properly end a story. They would rather conclude with the lead-in to the next thing. The next episode, the next series, the next big blockbuster hit, the next two entries in the trilogy, the next entry in the multiverse. These cliffhanger endings and obvious lead-ins and post-credit scenes trailing on and on and on together until the heat death of the universe. Now, this is not going to be a video lamenting the death of episodic storytelling. That's coming later. Instead, this is a video about endings. Because one thing that almost every great work from storytelling history has in common is that they all end. It may not be a happy end. It may not be a truly final end. It may leave you with more questions than when you started, but all of these endings do appropriately sum up the themes of the story, tie off the loose ends that they need to tie off, and leave you with the feeling that the story that you just finished was worth beginning. In this video, I'm going to walk you through some of my favorite conclusions from storytelling history, from the tragic to the happy to the ambiguous, to figure out what qualifies as a good ending and why that's so important to the story that came before it. If I had to name one particular format of story that really relies on a solid ending, I would probably say that it's tragedy. After all, the tale of Atlantis wouldn't teach a moral lesson if not for the waves closing over the great city. The story of Oedipus Rex would have just been a weird Freudian nightmare if the story had cut off after Oedipus found out that he had slept with his mother. Tragedy is all about a downfall, and that fall is not complete until the body hits the ground. But one of my favorite tragic conclusions, and one of history's most enduring tragic stories, is William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now, I'm no Shakespeare historian, but I do bet that whatever Elizabethan furniture contraption Shakespeare had to sit on while writing Hamlet, I bet it was not that comfortable. Fortunately for me, I get to write in comfort thanks to this video's sponsor, FlexiSpot. You may be familiar with the name FlexiSpot from their awesome standing desks, but today I am not here to stand, I am here to sit in the Lotus recliner from FlexiSpot. I think that my favorite feature about this chair is just how big it is. The seat is 64 inches across and it has extra wide, super soft armrests, meaning that as someone who can't sit normally anywhere, I can contort in this chair however I want and stay comfortable. This chair swivels and rocks and can recline to become the perfect napping spot. We actually had some friends over for a party this weekend, and 2 separate people fell asleep separately on this chair. And no, that does not mean that the party was boring. It was very fun. This chair is just very comfortable. The Lotus recliner looks great, feels great, and it even has a secret little hidden compartment on the side. What's not to love? If you're interested in lounging, working, or napping in complete comfort, you can check out the Lotus recliner via the link in my description. You're not going to want to miss out. And you can use my exclusive code LOTUS30 to get $30 off and free shipping. Thank you so much to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video, and thanks to all of you for checking out my sponsors. Hamlet is unique, even among Shakespeare's other plays, for its very particular take on tragedy. Throughout much of history, tragic storytelling has, at least roughly, followed along with the definition laid out by Aristotle's Poetics. There, he says that proper tragedy consists of a good man with respectable qualities, who, because of his one great moral or intellectual failing, falls from grace. And according to Aristotle, witnessing this fall should generate for its audience catharsis, the release of strong emotions like pity or fear drawn out by witnessing this action. And Shakespeare does follow along with this format in plays like Othello and roughly, arguably, in plays like Macbeth. And that means that most likely when he diverges from that in Hamlet, he's doing it for a reason. The opening of Hamlet seems almost to tease at the Aristotelian tragic structure. We're in a great place, the royal court of Denmark, where a tragedy has befallen the kingdom. A powerful man becomes jealous of the king of the land, his brother, and he murders him in secret. We have a great man and a tragic flaw. But Shakespeare flips the script, because the play is not about the jealous brother of the king, it is about the old king's son, Hamlet. And Hamlet is... well, he's not exactly a great guy. Granted, he is in some very tough circumstances. His father has just mysteriously died, and his uncle has taken over the throne and married his mother, but even then, he's not exactly an admirable man of high station. He's a young scholar, and when this ill fortune befalls him, he crumples under the burden. In his very first monologue, Hamlet is wallowing in self-pity. He begs that his too sullied flesh might melt, lamenting the fact that God has banned self-slaughter. And even when the ghost of his father visits him, telling Hamlet directly that he was murdered by the new king, forcing Hamlet to swear vengeance, Hamlet isn't able to get his act together. An Aristotelian tragic hero is all about action. They're about kicking and screaming against fate, even as their tragic flaw drags them down. But Hamlet's tragic flaw is his inaction. He fakes madness in order to gather intel. He stages an elaborate play trying to prove his uncle's guilt to himself. He's overhasty, impatient, and yet terrified to take any real action. And what makes it worse is that, in some way, Hamlet is aware of his own failings. In his most famous monologue, Hamlet argues that the only reason that someone like him, someone who has suffered as profoundly as he has, the only reason that they don't take their own life is because whatever's waiting for them afterwards could be way worse. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death? The undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. Hamlet refuses to take his own life out of fear and indecision, just as he refuses to make any other real tangible choice in his life because of fear and indecision. He can't decide if he wants to take revenge, and he can't even decide if he actively does not want to take revenge. It is the choosing that paralyzes him. And everyone else in the story isn't any better. They all muddle through, painfully unaware of the story that they were written into. All the direction, the drive, the gravity of the Aristotelian tragedy is lost in the fog of, honestly, quite human indecision. And so it comes to pass that there's really no satisfying way to end this story but for tragedy. And just as these characters wandered aimlessly through the rest of this story, all bluster and no action, so do they all kind of stumble into the finale. For all of his great plans and schemes, Hamlet comes upon his final opportunity to take vengeance entirely by accident. He's actually fallen prey to a scheme hatched by his uncle to kill Hamlet, and it is only by accidentally falling into that trap that Hamlet is put into the position to spring that trap back on his uncle. And, well, while springing that trap, he also manages to catch almost everybody else in the story. It's the natural conclusion to their infuriating indecision. These are just accidental poisonings, traded swords, every character collapsing into the same anonymous dead heap. Death is really the only way that these characters were able to stumble into some kind of finality, and by killing nearly everyone, Shakespeare makes sure that no character's story is left grimly unfinished. With the kind of wicked satisfaction that you only find in really well done tragedy, everyone ends up dead, and you as the audience are left kind of feeling like they deserved it. Hamlet does not have a happy ending, but it does have a good one. It's an ending that appropriately summarizes the story that came before it, one that entirely enfolds the world that Shakespeare opened up for us, and one that leaves us with a feeling of satisfaction that we rarely get to find in the real world. And ultimately, whether you count this as a happy ending or a sad one, these are the qualities that make for a good conclusion. But not every good ending is tragic, even if I personally find that happy endings are almost harder to do well. You see, I find the phrase, "and they all lived happily ever after," to not really be a good ending, by my definition at least. It's far too vague and generic to actually tell us anything about what the story was trying to say. It leaves a lot of different storylines unfinished. And then there's also, when you compare that to real life, you wonder, when has anyone in the history of all time really been happy forever after? But for a perfect example of how to do a happy fairy tale ending right, you need look no further than J.R.R. Tolkien. One of, in my opinion, the best things about the conclusion of The Lord of the Rings is how well earned it all feels. Tolkien does not make it easy for any of these characters to succeed. Even the ones destined for greatness, like Aragorn, the born king of Gondor, they have to suffer and grow a lot in order to become the heroes that they're meant to be. Gandalf may literally be sent down from heaven, but he's not a cheat code for victory. He has very real and very tangible limitations put in place. And Frodo may be the one who is destined to destroy the ring, but that is far from an easy journey for him. It would have been so easy for The Lord of the Rings to become over-mythologized and predictable. And I mean, like, on a very surface level, the story is predictable. The whole premise is that they need to destroy this ring to save the world, and surprise, surprise, they destroy the ring and they save the world. But through the pages of his story, Tolkien lets us into the minds, hearts, and souls of these characters. He finds the perfect balance between our characters winning and losing, and he leaves the how of that victory, the final victory, so up in the air that even when the highly anticipated victory comes, it feels a bit like a surprise. And I think that this is because, although these are very mythological, grand, epic circumstances, he lets these characters be truly human within those circumstances. Standing on the crack of doom under the most pressure that any mortal person could feel, Frodo crumbles. He turns his back towards the light and gives into the dark, and it is a truly devastating moment. But because of Frodo's earlier goodness, Gollum lives, and with a little nudge from a force unknown, he is the one who destroys the ring. But even then, this victory is bittersweet for the characters that are within the story. Laying out on the slopes of Mount Doom, their quest complete, Frodo believes entirely that his story is about to come to an end. "I am glad that you are here with me," said Frodo. "Here at the end of all things, Sam?" "Yes, I am with you, master," said Sam, laying Frodo's wounded hand gently to his breast. "And you're with me, and the journey's finished. But after coming all that way, I don't want to give up yet. It's not like me, somehow, if you understand." "Maybe not, Sam," said Frodo, "but it's like things are in the world. Hopes fail, an end comes. We have only a little time to wait now. We are lost in ruin and downfall, and there is no escape." But what Frodo doesn't know is that there is an escape. Their friends have not forgotten them, and they are rescued by the eagles and by Gandalf. In this way, the ending of The Lord of the Rings, sudden, providential, wrought with the potential for failure, ends up being a perfect summation of the story that has come before it. This story does not demand that any one of its heroes be perfect. They are human, and there is an understanding that as humans, they will stumble and fall. But when they fall, it is up to their friends who they have likely helped up onto their feet before, to come in and keep their feet from failing. They will carry each other up the mountain, accommodating and compensating for each other's weaknesses, because that is what it is to love another human. It's the kind of ending that works so well because it is very thoroughly grounded in all of the ideas, themes, and growth that Tolkien has laid out in the rest of the story. This ending also does such an expert job of reclosing all of the doors that it has opened. The Lord of the Rings is structured so that the audience gets to go on the journey that the protagonists go on. As the world grows before them, it grows in our eyes. We start out in the Shire, a small place with small people, very much like our own. But as the hobbits leave the Shire and they go and see the great wide world, so do we. It makes sense then that the ending goes to such painstaking lengths to make sure that each of these chapters is properly closed out. We depart from Aragorn and Arwen and their kingdom. We say goodbye to the King Theoden, to Éowyn and Faramir. We know what became of Legolas and Gimli, and largely what happened to the elves and to the dwarves. We see the end of Saruman, the dissolution of Sauron's forces, and as we say goodbye to distant kingdoms and dark lords and great kings, we close back in on where it all began, a kind of retracing of steps to bring us all back home. And what's important here is that Tolkien doesn't over-explain. He doesn't need to get into the nitty-gritty of what Gondor's tax policy is going to be, because that's never something that he got us to care about. Tolkien has carefully managed the scope of his story. He knows what he has gotten us invested in, and so he can walk us back through the story, take us back home in a way that feels satisfactory and conclusive. In fact, the final novel closes with Sam sitting back down in his home and saying, "Well, I'm back." It is very hard to get this right. Once you've opened up such a large and epic fantasy world, it is very difficult to make everybody happy with the way that you close that fantasy world out. But as is the case with so much of the magic of Middle-earth, Tolkien was very personally dedicated to getting this right because it was something that he cared about. As he explained in a letter, "I like tying up loose ends and hate them in other people's books. I like to wind up the clues, as do not only children, but most folk of hearty appetite. Again, the story began in the simple Shire of the Hobbits, and it must end there. Back to common life and earth, the ultimate foundation again." Finally and cogently, it is the function of the longish coda to show the cost of victory, as always, and to show that no victory, even on a world-shaking scale, is final. And I think that last part is key to why Tolkien's ending is so very satisfactory. The Lord of the Rings ends in a Eucatastrophe. A Eucatastrophe is the opposite of a catastrophe, in which instead of everything going wrong, everything in the end goes right. Of course, it's no wonder that that term so perfectly fits how The Lord of the Rings ended, because Tolkien literally coined that term to describe the ending that he had already written. But Eucatastrophe does not mean Deus Ex Machina. It does not mean that a wizard waves a wand and everything goes perfectly well. It means that everything ends right. But the thing is that right is not synonymous with happy. Throughout the ending of The Lord of the Rings, there is a great deal of loss and pain, and one of the most acute ones is probably the departure of Frodo. In the end, although Eucatastrophe has rung its merry bells, Frodo is unable to ever really go home. "But," said Sam, and tears started in his eyes, "I thought you were going to enjoy the Shire too, for years and years after all you've done." "So I thought too once, but I have been too deeply hurt, Sam. I tried to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me. It must often be so, Sam. When things are in danger, someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them." This certainly isn't a happy thing. God knows it always makes me bawl my eyes out when I read or watch this scene. But those tears are a good kind of tears, because you know deep in your heart that this ending is the right thing. A victory that comes about without any loss or any sacrifice feels hollow. It doesn't feel real. Sometimes, if not always, someone must give something up in order for that thing to be kept. As Tolkien explains, Eucatastrophe does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal defeat, and insofar is evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. For Tolkien, the conclusion of The Lord of the Rings was an echo of a much larger truth. As a Catholic, he believed that someday there would be the great Eucatastrophe, the day when God would return and set everything right. The Lord of the Rings is just an echo of that great Eucatastrophe, a small cycle of history, and that means that its story is not final. The end of The Lord of the Rings is a long breath out, but Tolkien makes it explicitly clear that this is not the final breath. Someday, whether or not we see it in the future, there will be another great inhale, and the story will start again, cycling time and time again throughout history, until at last, with a long final sigh, this world will pass on into the next. The Lord of the Rings does end for those characters, but it is not the very end. Sam once asked Frodo, "Don't the great tales never end?" "No, they never end as tales," said Frodo, "but the people in them come and go when their part's ended. Our part will end later, or sooner." The ending to The Lord of the Rings is so satisfying because it leaves you with the knowledge that it's not the end. Not really. It's the end of one part of this story, but the great story will continue to pulsate onward throughout all of history. It is both a reflection of the real world as Tolkien saw it, but it's also a consolation. Sometimes, although not always, hopefully we can imagine that everything would end right. The Lord of the Rings is a perfect example of a happy ending done very well. It wraps up the themes and ideas of the story beautifully, leaving the reader with a whole heap of ideas, inspirations, and thoughts that they can carry with them out of the realm of fairy and into the real world. It ties all the loose ends of the massive story that Tolkien introduced us to. And perhaps most compellingly, The Lord of the Rings provides us with a very specific, sublime satisfaction. It's not an unachievable, unrealistic, plastic, mass-produced kind of happy ending. It's one that, most importantly, feels right. But an ending does not necessarily need to fall into the category of happy or tragic in order to be good. One of my favorite kinds of conclusions is not the ones that worry about writing out a long exhale of a conclusion, but the ones that intentionally leave you on an inhale, the open ending. And one of my all-time favorite open-ended stories is Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Just a quick warning, I am going to be spoiling the entirety of The Road, so skip around if necessary. The Road is a novel about a father and son traversing an apocalyptic world. It's not too original of a concept, but what is really original is the sheer simplicity. McCarthy doesn't lose himself in the weeds of trying to explain what caused the apocalypse, or, what happened to the rest of the world, or how many human beings survived. We see this world through the eyes of this father and son, and the only things that come to matter to us are the things that matter to them. And those larger picture things just aren't that important in their everyday lives. The story opens, "When he woke in the woods in the dark and the cold of the night, he'd reach out to touch the child sleeping beside him." Their world is not the ruined planet around them. Their society is not the cannibalistic hordes raiding the countryside. Their universe exists entirely in the space between the two of them. This book strips away everything except for that relationship. The punctuation is practically non-existent. The dialogue is very simple and real. In fact, McCarthy doesn't even give names to the two main characters. After all, what's the point of a name when the only two people in the world are myself and you? My favorite line in this book reads, "Then he just sat there, holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He knew only that the child was his warrant. He said, 'If he is not the word of God, God never spoke.'" The theming of this story can be summed up quite simply. Despite everything, holding onto hope and onto some semblance of goodness. There's not much for them to be hoping about in this world, or much to be hoping about for the future, and there is very little goodness to be seen around them. There's never really any confirmation that their attempts to be hopeful or good ever do anything for them, but still, they hold on to these things because they must, because these are the things that keep them human. We wouldn't ever eat anybody, would we? No, of course not. Even if we were starving, we're starving now. You said we weren't. I said we weren't dying. I didn't say we weren't starving. But we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't. No matter what? No, no matter what. Because we're the good guys. Yes. And we're carrying the fire. And we're carrying the fire. Yes. Okay. This book is pure human survival, winnowed down to the very essentials. But even in that, the man and the boy find it essential to hold on to these ineffable, fleeting qualities of hope and goodness. They hold on to the fire. At the end of the story, as the father falls prey to an unknown ailment, the boy pleads, "I want to be with you." "You can't. Please? You can't. You have to carry the fire." "I don't know how to." "Yes, you do. Is it real, the fire?" "Yes, it is." "Where is it?" "I don't know where it is." "Yes, you do. It's inside you. It was always there. I can see it." "Do you remember that little boy, Papa?" "Yes, I remember him." "Do you think he's all right, that little boy?" "Oh, yes. I think he's all right." "Do you think he was lost?" "No, I don't think he was lost. I'm scared that he was lost. I think he's all right." "But who will find him if he was lost? Who will find the little boy?" "Goodness will find the little boy. It always has. It will again." The father dies, and it is at this point that this story very well could have become a tragedy. But despite how bleak and stripped back and miserable this world is, McCarthy isn't naive enough to think that the absolute totality of tragedy that we see in something like Hamlet is even remotely realistic. Rather, as the scope of the boy's world dwindles from 2 to 1, McCarthy offers us an olive branch. The boy is approached by a man who doesn't immediately attack him. The man says that the boy should come with him because he shouldn't be alone and that the man has a family. He has kids around the boy's age. He tells the boy that he should hold on to the gun that his father gave him for his own safety, and when asked, he says that he is a good guy. And when pressed, he even says that he too is carrying the fire. And so the boy goes with him. It is the hope and the goodness that his father drilled into him that allows the boy to take this opportunity for what it is, and we can only hope that the man and his family are holding onto these things just as tightly as the boy and his father were. We don't know what became of the boy. We don't know who the man was, or if he really was as good as he said he was. But McCarthy leaves us with hope, a little flickering flame of hope that perhaps not all is lost. The novel concludes, "Once there were brook trout in the stream in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming, maps and mazes of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery." This mystery is at the heart of The Road. It is a bleak, grim, and often brutal novel, but it is so realistic in the sense that it does not allow nihilism to be the final word. If human beings really are capable of all of these levels of evil and depravity and cruelty, then it also follows that there would be some kind of goodness inherent to human nature. Unlike so much other post-apocalyptic fiction, The Road doesn't lose itself in the bogs of trying to explain the apocalypse, or trying to define a way forward for the reformation of humanity. Because McCarthy kept the scope so tightly closed in on just this father and son and the flame between them, this quiet hum of a conclusion, the sharing of the fire to another person to possibly more, feels as fulfilling as any great literary epic. Although it is a very dark story, The Road manages to leave behind this kind of aching optimism, the kind of thing that sits in the pit of your stomach or like back where your molars are, this grubby kind of hope that if humanity is capable of all of the terrible things that we know humanity is capable of, then there must also be a capacity for some good. In order to be well done, by my definition, a story doesn't need to evoke any particular emotion, but it does need to evoke emotion. A story conclusion need not be happy, but it should leave people happy that they went through the effort of starting this story in the first place. Maybe the ending left them thinking. Maybe it left them with a pit of dread in their stomach, and maybe, just sometimes, it left them smiling so hard that a few tears escaped. A really shocking twist or a cliffhanger, or a wink and a nudge towards a story that is to come, is honestly the easiest part of writing a story. The writers of Lost certainly found that out. What's really difficult is being able to distill the entirety of your story into one thematic core, knowing the story that you laid out well enough to be able to helpfully and finally close all the doors that you opened, and understanding the relationship of your story with our real reality well enough to create a conclusion that feels satisfactory. These days, a lot of emphasis is put on the hook of a story. The beginning, or, the content, the characters, the romance, the world that has been created, but I think that the true proof of an author's mettle comes at the ending. This video is not a how-to guide on how to write a good ending for your book. I'm so sorry if that's what you're here for. I'm not qualified to teach that. I'm not even a writer of fiction. And to be completely honest, this whole video came about because last week I was on the phone with my sister, and she was asking me why the ending of The Lord of the Rings works so well, because that's the stuff that I talk to my family about. And in this whole entire video, putting this all together, thinking about it, I've realized that I don't know why the ending of The Lord of the Rings works so very well. Sure, I did line out my specific criteria in this video, and I could talk your ear off about Eucatastrophe until you get so bored that you leave, but to me, a really satisfying conclusion, like the ones I talked about in this video, they're kind of a magic trick. And I think that's probably why modern media, as hastily written and formulaic as so much of it is, I think that's why they avoid endings so much. Because a really good ending, there isn't a rule book. There's no, like, 10-step arc that you follow. There's no character circle. There's no 100% foolproof way to satisfy everyone in your audience. And endings can be really hard on an audience. No one who really loves a story ever really wants to see it end. So I think that the real magic trick of excellent writing is when someone who really loves a story gets to the last page and they see the words "the end," they read those words, they close the book, and they're left feeling that that was the end. And that should stay the end. In the comments, I would love to hear some examples of really good endings in your eyes, and let me know what makes those endings so good to you, because I feel like this is a very personal thing, and the things that I listed out in this video are by no means subjective, so let me know your opinions in the comments. After all of the craziness of the Terry Pratchett video and my birthday, and I just threw a big party with my housemates, now I'm going to be back on a regular posting schedule of one video a week on Fridays, so if you want to stick around to see next week's video and the week after that's video, go ahead and subscribe. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and share it with a friend because that really helps me out, and if you would like to support me financially, go ahead and check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description. But as always, thank you so much for joining me this week and every week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.